expectations as far as what I expect from an entry-level librarian. Besides the flexibility, I want someone who comes to me who wants to learn. I really want someone who's got a very open mind. I'm the kind of person, and I think this is true for several of the colleagues I know who do some hiring, is that beyond having a second master's or PhD in a subject area, I want someone who has a willingness to learn and a willingness to kind of go out there, make an effort, and know that they're going to be supported. And so someone who has that kind of drive to learn, to want to learn new things, do new things, that is somebody that I'm looking for beyond, let's say, someone who's got that subject expertise. I think sometimes that the profession maybe overvalues some of that when what we really want is someone who can go in there and really work well with faculty, who uses their interpersonal skills to work well with students and with colleagues. I want someone who I can work well with together, and someone who I feel that I can learn from and they can teach me, and vice versa. So I'm expecting all of you here, when you're coming into the profession, to teach the people that you're coming in new things that you've learned in school that I haven't heard in 20 years, or maybe I haven't heard in 5 years. But again, it's got to be that two-way street as far as sharing that information and then giving back. When you actually prepare for the interview, a couple things I would say is, first of all, besides being on time, is that do your homework, do your research. Find out as much as you can about the institution that you're applying for, whether it's a corporate library, a public library, or an academic library. That includes things like, obviously, looking at the website for the institution. But beyond that, look to see if you can find the mission statement of the library and a mission statement of the institution. If you can include that information in your presentation, and typically if you're going to be applying for an academic position, they're going to want you to do a presentation. If you include the mission statement, then you've just leaped way up at the top of the heap. Because most people completely forget about that. And the library wants to know, does this person understand the kind of culture that we have at this institution? Do people understand what our goals are, what we strive to be? And if you can include that information in your presentation, you've got them right where you want them. It depends on the institution. I will say at the University of San Francisco, we're a Jesuit institution. One of the very strong underlying themes for a lot of the things that go on campus is social justice. So if you can bring in elements of social justice to understand that diversity is a key element of the university, to bring in those elements, and those are actually particularly drawn out in the mission statement of the campus and the university. Those are the kinds of things you want to look for. So one of the things I actually did when I applied for my position at USF is I actually included a quote from the mission statement, and people afterwards were like, I had no idea that's what was in the mission statement. So I even surprised some of them, but you will guarantee that is one way to really grab their attention, so you can get that kind of I wouldn't say insider information, but at least information that's close to the institution's heart and to their mission. One thing I would do is if they don't send you a copy, and sometimes they will send you a copy if you're an applicant, is to ask. Any library should have a mission statement. It is perfectly okay to ask the library, do you have a copy of your mission statement that you could send me? Or is there a copy on the web that I can take a look at if you can't locate it? Or maybe for some strange reason it might be behind a passworded part of a web page you can't get to. But it is something that's absolutely information that they should be willing to share with you. So if you don't see it, ask. Another thing that you can do as far as if you know you've got an interview coming up is, do you know anybody who did an internship, or do you know anybody who might work there, even as a support staff person? Can you get some idea as far as what's the culture like? What is it like to work there? I've had several people who've asked me about the University of California, Irvine, because that's one of the former places where I've worked, and it's been a while now, but I could kind of tell them that when I left there, There were some transitions going on in the management structure. There were some new librarians that were coming on. There were some people who were retiring. So they got an idea as far as what the culture was like there at the university. And so I would encourage you, if you've got that opportunity to know someone who's done an internship, or if you know somebody who works there, to see if you can get some kind of information as far as generally, what's it like to work there? And also, believe it or not, that's a question that you can ask when you get to the interview site. So if you can't get that information, one of the first questions you might want to ask in your small group, typically you'll meet with a search committee, which is about anywhere from 3 to 5 people for an academic position, and you can just ask them one-on-one and just say, what's it like to work here? As far as one of your opportunities to be able to ask a question. And speaking of asking questions, that's one thing you want to make sure you do, is come in with questions that you want them to answer. Don't ever come to the end of an interview and if they say, well, do you have any more questions? If you say, well, I don't really think so, or no, you've just dropped down about 3 or 4 pegs. They want you to show interest. So whatever it is, write down any kind of questions that you might have about the library, the institution, anything like that. That's something that I would encourage you to do before you get into the interview process. Presentations. How many people have actually done presentations before, let's say, audiences of 20, 30 people?
You mean just in a classroom? Or?
Any kind of situation. Okay, so you've all done something in the classroom situation. Well, I will tell you it's 10 times harder, 10 times scarier when you're doing it before the entire staff of the library. And that's very often what happens in particular in an academic institution, which I have the most experience with. So a couple of things I would recommend is, first of all, always, always, always have a backup. So if, for example, you're relying on the web, make sure you've got a PowerPoint with screenshots in it. If you're relying on something that is on your email system to pull and download right before you do your presentation, make sure you have it on a jump drive with you. Always have a backup for technology, because when you least want it to fail, technology is going to fail. So make sure when you're doing your presentation, you've got that backup plan with you. Next, before you do the presentation, typically you're going to get a sheet from them saying, this is a scenario we want you to address. And you have 20 minutes to give a talk and 10 minutes for questions. Time yourself. If you have to, drag your spouse or a friend or a partner or whatever in front of you and practice giving that to make sure you have the timing down. The worst thing you can do is run all the way to the very end of the time slot and not allow for any time for questions, because typically you're on a very tight schedule when you're doing the interview process. So I would encourage you to do the presentation to make sure you've got the timing right. The other thing is that most people, when they do these presentations, are going to use PowerPoint. I can't tell you the number of times I've gone to a conference or a meeting and I have seen black and white PowerPoint and that's all you see on the slides. Please use creativity, use animation, whatever it is. Put some spice or spark in your presentation that people will remember. I presented at an institution that was very close to the ocean, so I actually found a PowerPoint background, which was the sea. And I used that throughout my entire presentation, and people came up afterwards and thought, well, that was really kind of a clever idea to pick that out. So look at the backgrounds, kind of be creative when you're doing that. That's another thing we want to see, is how creative are you when you're giving your presentation. The interview itself, typically it can last anywhere from a day for an academic position up to a day and a half, maybe even 2 days if you're talking for about a more advanced position. It is an exhausting process. So I would encourage you to kind of keep that in mind when you're going, is that it can be very exhausting. You've got a schedule where every half hour or hour is taken up meeting different people. You might meet faculty in a certain discipline if you're applying for a job that has a subject specialty. You're going to meet with small groups. You're going to meet with the dean or the director of the library. You're going to meet with a big group of people. You're going to meet all kinds of situations. So just be prepared for the fact that it's intense. It's a very intense process. It can be very exhausting. So just be prepared for that. The other thing I'm going to tell you from experience also you want to do is if you have to travel for your interview, if you can't take a full carry-on bag, at least take on a change of underwear, a toothbrush, and a little tube of toothpaste. Because otherwise, if they lose your luggage along the way, they'll understand if you have your travel clothes on, but they're not necessarily going to understand if your breath is a little sour along the way. So just for your own personal comfort, I would encourage you to, on your carry-on, if you're going to that kind of a business trip, I always say pack a change of underwear, a toothbrush, and a small tube of toothpaste. What kind of questions are you going to get at the interview? That's a lot of times people want to know what is it that people typically are going to ask. And you're going to get ones that are very specific to that job that you're applying for, but you're going to get some of the standard questions that I would say are on 75% of the job searches that I've been participated in. One question that's going to come up, especially if you stay in California, is the diversity question. They're going to ask you some question about diversity as far as, have you worked with a diverse clientele? How have you provided services to a diverse clientele? Because of the changing demographics in California and the fact that we're becoming more and more diverse, it's very important for us to know that you've got that experience, you've got that aptitude to work with people of many different ethnicities, cultures, religions. So again, just keep in mind that that question will most likely come up somewhere along the line in the interview process. The other question that comes up a lot that kind of throws people is, where are you going to be and where do you see yourself in 5 years? It's one of those questions that kind of goes beyond just librarianship, but seems to kind of raise up. They want to know, is this a stepping stone for you to kind of go on and be a department head somewhere else? It may be showing some initiative on your part to say, well, after 5 years, I'd like to be able to have published, 2 or 3 articles or be able to develop a tutorial, or they want to know exactly what you're going to be producing within that period of time. Because typically, if you're going to survive the 10-year review process in an academic institution, 5 to 6 years is that kind of window where they're going to say, yes, this person is meeting all the criteria we set for them to be promoted and to be given tenure and a promotion. Or they're going to say, no, I think you need to start looking elsewhere for a position because we don't feel you're a good fit for this particular institution. And now that I've talked about the promotion and tenure process, that's another thing you need to consider when you apply for a position. How many people are interested in academic libraries? Okay, so there's a couple of people might be in academic libraries. One of the things to consider is, if you're applying for a job, does it have faculty status versus is it just an academic or a staff position? And that's because the faculty status may come with it the requirement to publish. And if that's something that you're not comfortable with or not willing to learn or don't want to really learn, then you might want to steer away from those kinds of positions. Because there is going to be that expectation that you meet the criteria for publishing, just like any other faculty member at the institution. So for example, at the Cal States, the librarians have faculty status. And there is an expectation, although it does vary from campus to campus, that you will be publishing in the literature, in peer-reviewed journals, about whatever your expertise is in librarianship. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're applying for those positions. The other question that I kind of alluded to earlier is that I want to know, and a lot of employers want to know, how do you deal with difficult or stressful situations or stressful people or difficult people? Public libraries, people who are interested in public libraries. Okay, so you've got quite a few people in public libraries. That is a question you will absolutely get in a public library interview because, again, there's always going to be a situation that's going to come up where you've got someone who's not happy for one reason or another. The book they put on hold, someone else took. The computers are all taken and they've reserved one. I mean, they're going to find an excuse to be upset. Or could they just be having a bad day? You need to be able to respond to that. So you need to figure out, how am I going to respond to a difficult or a stressful situation? I interviewed right out of library school with the Los Angeles County Public Library System, and one of the scenarios I was given was one where they said, well, you're in the young adolescents kind of children's room, and you've got a really noisy bunch of kids that comes in, and they're really kind of rambunctious and kind of disturbing to get patrons in the area. How do you handle that kind of a situation? And so basically what I said is, well, I'm one of 6 kids, so I'm from a big family. And typically I said, you know, how would you like it if your younger brother came in or your younger sister came in and knocked over something that you had created, or was making so much noise that you couldn't watch TV, or you couldn't read your book that you've been doing? How would you feel? And that response from them was like, okay, this person really understands the dynamics of kids and how to work with it, because typically the kids are going to say, well, yeah, you're right. I probably wouldn't like it if my younger brother came in and, or sister came in and bugged me and knocked over something I was doing, or caused some kind of disruption. So think about those kinds of scenarios where you actually can resolve a stressful or difficult situation, and what skills you would use to resolve that. I think especially in the public library setting, that question is going to come up.